with rich experience and knowledge, as we'll explore the critical role that energy incumbents play in shaping the green future. Allow me to welcome our distinguished moderator of this discussion, Dr. Yousef Alshammari, who is a Senior Research Fellow at Imperial College London. He is also the CEO and the Head of Research at CMarkits and TV speaker on energy markets with Al Arabiya News Channel. So without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to our moderator, Dr. Yousef Alshammari, and our esteemed panelists as we delve into the important topic.
Welcome. Thanks, Michelle, for the introduction. Thank you, and I hope you all guys have had a chance for a delicious lunch. I'm very happy to be with you here, and we're with a very prestigious group of panelists from the U.S. energy industry. We have a very exciting topic to go through, as Michelle has just indicated, the role of energy incumbents in driving a global energy transition, and in particular the green future. The subject is actually very, very timely, and going through this the recent research, you can see that some companies, or the recent research has indicated that there are some conflicts and uncertainty on how companies will look at the role of incumbents. And in fact, some may consider climate policies as a threat, and some may look at them as an opportunity. So here we have my panelists from the governments and the industry who will enable us to better understand that uncertainty and how would companies and governments view the role of energy incumbents in driving the energy transition. So I would like to introduce our first panelist, Mr. John Millian, who is the Executive Vice President at the NYSERDA, that is the New York State Energy and Research Development Authority. He is the Executive Vice President for Policy and Regulatory Affairs. So pretty much these are the people who would set the regulations. And our second panelist is Ms. Amanda Dasch, who is the Vice President of Shell for Wind Power in America. And she is responsible for developing the renewable energy portfolio in North and South America. And we also have our panelist, Mr. Akshay Sahni, who is the General Manager for Strategy and Technology at Chevron Technology Ventures. So these are the people who will be responsible for developing technologies and business models that would include hydrogen, carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And we also have our fourth panelist, Mr. Sander Cohan, who is the Head of Innovation at National Grid Partners. So he's responsible for creating and introducing new transformative technologies and business models to drive the next phase of energy transition. So with this prestigious panelists, we look forward to look at very exciting discussion. And my first question will go to Mr. John. Under the transition under crisis, which is the first theme of this panel, how do you view the energy incumbents or the incumbents energy companies shaping the transition to a more sustainable energy landscape, and what challenges do they face?
Sure, that's great, and good afternoon, everybody. Very happy to be here with you. And an interesting question because truthfully, incumbents, by their definition, they've been around a long time, and people know who they are. People understand what they do. There's a lot of trust built into a lot of the longevity of a lot of those organizations and the continuous services that they experience. So, where I think incumbents, have been quite successful at, at least starting a transition. I like to think of ourselves really at the very beginning of a transition, to tell you the truth. But they've actually been really quite good messengers about what the long-term outcome really needs to orient to, right? And given that there are people who respect the expertise and respect the past history of work, I think that there is quite a bit of communicating that can come from incumbents that can really get to consumers, because at the end of the day, really what we need to do is change that consumer marketplace and get consumers more used to understanding the types of decisions that they're going to need to make. So having the incumbents act as messengers is very key. Having incumbents do the planning work is also very key. Just to quickly get to a challenge is, I think there's a little bit of a struggle. I'm going to say this comes from the state policy side. But I think, trying to figure out what that role is, what the business model is, I think is really kind of need to be the next challenge. When I think about even just thinking about distribution utilities, right? So this is just the electricity utility. That is going to have to operate and function in a very different way than it does today in order for decarbonization to be successful. We risk huge overbuilds. We risk a lot of stranded investment if we don't focus on the distribution side of the system and make sure that that load becomes flexible to different types of supply signals. And getting that distribution system operator, we call it a DSO, in New York, really kind of stood up and understanding what it is and how they're going to function has been a bit of a challenge to try to figure out what that new marketplace looks like for that DSO to actually be, kind of the operator of that new system and ensure that as we're moving towards decarbonization, that there actually is an economic value at the end of the day for that as well.
That's very interesting. My second question will go to Ms. Amanda. What realities do you think coming from Shell, which is one of the world's largest energy companies, what do you think the realities do international energy companies face when operating in such a complex, ever complex now, and economic and environment, especially as it pertains to energy transition? And you are from Shell, and you are the VP for wind power, which some members of the public may consider that unusual. So I'd like to hear your views on that.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to be here and with all the panelists. I've really enjoyed the morning as well, so nice to be in the room with all the big brains. I think the challenges we have are manyfold, and our current reality right now is that we have an obligation to supply more power to meet the growing demand that exists. We also have an obligation to provide energy that has security and reliability. We also have to provide affordable energy. And we also have to decarbonize our operations and help our partners and our customers decarbonize. So often those objectives are in conflict. It's a little bit of a challenge. And right now, I think all of us have experienced a very interesting last 36 months against a backdrop of the global pandemic, the war in Ukraine, globalization or deglobalization, in our case, of the supply chain, severe weather events, bank bailouts recently. You name it. We're also trying to manage an evolving energy system. And maybe helpful if I go into a few specific challenges that we're experiencing around decarbonization, around development, and around delivery. And maybe Sandra will speak to some of that delivery piece in supply chain as well. If I take decarbonization as one of the challenges in front of us, the war in the Ukraine, when Russia invaded, created an energy supply crisis across Europe. Prices went up, supply was constrained. Some governments decided to intervene and try to control prices, and that created additional disturbance. And while this was happening in parallel, global leaders who months before had asked for curtailment or termination of oil and gas development came to the energy companies and asked us to double down on production and development. This is a real challenge. This is a dilemma. Then if I talk about development of new projects, energy projects, whether they're fossil projects, whether they're renewable projects, they take a long time to deliver. And one of the reasons they take a long time to deliver is we have a really lengthy and costly permitting process. Right now in offshore wind, which is what I'm trying to do, we're building the permitting process as we go, which means it's a little bit unpredictable. And when you have an unpredictable process that dictates your timeline, you have an unpredictable timeline. And that makes investors nervous. So that's a real dilemma. And then we talk about delivery. So right now we're really dealing with some severe supply chain issues. And if I go to a specific point around the IRA, that projects that we're trying to deliver in the renewables business right now need the ITC funding under the IRA to be investable projects. In order to qualify for ITC funding, you have to have a certain amount of domestic content. In order to have the domestic content, you have to have a mature US supply chain, which we don't have. In order to build a mature US supply chain, you have to have committed to enough development projects that the vendors are willing to make the investment to make that supply chain go. So we're in a bit of a do loop. And right now, we're dependent on European countries, Asian countries for 50 to 90% of our supply chain for our projects.
I see.
So I'll leave that there.
I can see the challenge is quite big and uncertain. My next question would go to Mr. Akshay from Chevron, but from the technology side. And as you are the head of technology development at Chevron Energy Technologies, what do you think the potential impacts of the transition to net zero that energy incumbents operations do existing that would have in terms of the relationships where they operate? So how do you think the technology development would actually contribute to the relationships?
Well, thank you, Yousef, and thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It's also a pleasure to represent an incumbent that has been around for over 140 years. We'll talk more about that later. But our strategy is very simple. We want to use technology to decarbonize our current assets. These are the assets that are producing or manufacturing products that are essential for human prosperity. They are essential for lifting people out of poverty. As we develop technology and implement and execute technology solutions towards a lower carbon future, to make investments in technology solutions for hydrogen, renewable fuels, carbon capture, utilization, and storage solutions. So it's a twofold strategy to decarbonize your current assets while investing in technologies for the future energy system. But coming back to our history, when Chevron opened its first manufacturing facility in 1879, so I'm talking as an incumbent, it was the Alameda Point Refinery, and we were not manufacturing fuel for automobiles or aeroplanes at that time because they hadn't been invented yet. We were displacing whale oil that was being used for lighting. 20 or 30 years later, during the Roaring *20s, when automobiles were replacing horse carts and a lot of the stench in the roads here and in New York, and another energy transition was happening. Refrigerators were replacing ice chests. And now fast forward a century later, and we're seeing another energy transition and evolution of human energy demand, where green electrons and green molecules are replacing higher carbon forms of energy. So as incumbents, I think we have a dual role to play. We want to supply affordable, reliable, and ever cleaner energy, as my fellow panelists said. At the same time, look into the future and invest in technology solutions that will help develop the future energy system.
Okay, thank you. Which quite intensive job, and I believe that oil companies will always, they are the people who will finance. So I do believe that you have a very critical role to play. My fourth question will go to Mr. Sander from National Grid. Mr. Sander, what do you think the state governments and how state governments agencies actually can play a role in creating and enabling an environment for the incumbents to decarbonize the energy supply? And I believe I heard your discussion earlier today that you have a problem of interconnecting grids. So how do you think that the energy incumbents can create the environment in terms of the grid interconnection and so on?
So a very careful answer to that question. So we are a regulated utility here in Massachusetts, also in New York, and then also in the United Kingdom. So when we look towards the energy transition is a big piece of our future. We see it as something that we do to enable our customers and to support our customers in the future, and something that's necessary that we need to do. We look to state governments and our regulators as partners, in a way to help us enable and create the pathways that are necessary to meet these longer-term not even longer term, these really immediate aspirational goals towards zero carbon, towards energy equity, towards better customer prices and stronger reliability in the face of climate change. So, the short answer is that, we work very closely with our regulators in the state and NYSERDA to provide those, to set out those critical research and development and commercial pathways to enable us to transform and to provide transformative services to the market, because that's sort of a critical piece as we are as a market actor. So that's the first question, right? Is that we, everything we do, we try to look to the regulator and provide a rationale and explanation as to how what we are doing will ultimately provide benefits and achieve our mission of providing energy reliably, cheaply, equitably, and inexpensively, and to benefit the customer. So that's the short answer there. The longer answer is when you look at something like interconnection, that's a piece of it, and I think there are two pieces to that. I think number one is when you look at number one is to work with our regulators as a partner, right? To understand that we are trying to provide things like interconnection as quickly as possible, so that customers can have rooftop solar and different energy options. And so, our conversation with state governments is to make sure that those existing regulations are being enacted in a way that they're helping and not hurting, right? So that they both contribute to grid reliability, but then also allow for DSO concepts and greater access to distributed energy resources. On the other side of this, looking forward to this, is that when you start looking at electrification on a grand scale, right? So moving things beyond, pilots and neighborhood level to really sort of trying to realize a distribution system operator model, or something similar to that, then we look to partner with our regulator in the state to lay out a way to think about the grid in a different way, right? To make sure that our regulations are living documents that reflect both the customer need, our structure as a corporation, and our structure as a utility, and our place as the incumbent, and then also where we want to go, the state of the technology, and whether or not those can reflect the actual capabilities of the technology, whether or not our interconnection standards are holding us back, right? Because they're based on an old way of thinking about the grid, or are they something that can both sort of allow us to move forward, but not move forward recklessly? Because I think the last piece about this really is that the reason why these standards are in place is to provide reliability of service, and so we need to move quickly. But at the end of the day, our goal is to provide reliable service to our customers, and so if we don't do that, then we're violating one of our core missions.
Well, that's very interesting. Now